I am here with Juan Williams. He's actually, I think, my first Fox guest. Juan is, of course, Fox News senior political analyst. He's also a columnist for The Hill. He's got a banger new book, New Prize for These Eyes, The Rise of America's Second Civil Rights Movement. He's written 6 books, including the bestseller Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights of Years 1954 to 1965. He's written Thurgood Marshall, American Revolutionary Bio, which is in BookBub's 40 Best Biographies of All Time. He's been a columnist for the Washington Post. He's been one of the real visible journalists in our country in the last 20, 30, 40 years. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you so much, Donny. And yeah, 40 years, that's the period that really bookends this book that came out just this week, New Prize for These Eyes, and Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years 54 to 65. So it's 40 years in my life, 40 years in a 70-year-old guy's life. I wrote one book, and that book was a bestseller, accompanied PBS series of the same name. And now I've written this book, and I hope that it's a game changer for a lot of people. It's
going to be a bestseller. It really kind of got me thinking in ways I hadn't thought. In other words, obviously we hear civil rights movement all the time, and and we're going to get into I've spent a lot of time on the book, but I hadn't really thought about a new civil rights movement started in 2008 with Barack Obama and went through 2023, and then we've got a third one coming that it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like. But let's first just talk a little politics. This is going to air the Tuesday after the inauguration, so next week. So we will have had the benefit of Trump's speech. Give me your thoughts. You wrote an interesting piece for The Hill the other day where you kind of talked about Trump might be surprised at the difficulty he might have in living up to a lot of his promises and getting things through and having Congress not necessarily work in his favor.
Well, right now here in Washington, if you sit with Senator Thune, who's the new Senate Majority Leader for the Republicans, what you see is Thune is trying to slow him down. And talking about different ways that they can package legislation in 2 parts to try to get some small victories up front, rather than trying to get an extension of the 2017 tax cut in place immediately. And of course, Trump is all about, let's get it done now. And he's working with the Speaker of the House, Johnson, but Johnson has a very narrow majority. And he's also got a bit of a rebellious Freedom Caucus of people who have their own ideas about what Trump should be doing with regard to the federal deficit and with regard to the tax cut extension, how big it should be. This is big stuff. You gotta negotiate. You gotta argue. Now, Trump clearly is not a great negotiator. He's a great dictator when it comes to these ideas. And I think that it's going to be frustrating for him to understand in a narrowly divided House, you got a lot of kings and queens who are going to say, hey, no, I don't like it, or I don't like it that way. Or, of course, we love you, Mr. President Trump, but you got to understand what my district wants. I mean, Trump is talking about doing away with, local sales tax, the benefits in terms of your federal tax receipts. And a lot of the Republican red districts are going to say, wait a second, we didn't buy into that. We don't agree with that.
The only question I have for you is we have not seen Republicans stand up. I mean, you go through the hearings now, and even the Republicans that were ardently against some of his picks, Joni Ernst with Pete Hegseth, seem to all come around. They don't want the wrath. And so what makes you think it's going to be different this time around?
Well, it's not that I think it'll be different. I think one of the sort of formative differences is the narrow divide in the House. The second thing that I think is different this time around is that Trump is a lame duck. So you've got 2 years basically before the 26 midterms. And don't forget, Donnie, what happened in the 18 midterms. They
41 seats for the Democrats. Yeah.
There you go. So they had the House, the Senate, and the presidency after the 16 election. And it blew up on them they're going to want to avoid that. Well, the question is, well, how do you do that? Well, just giving Trump full run and saying, oh, deficits don't matter. That's a big one, I think, right there. I think a lot of stuff is in the air. obviously everybody's talking about TikTok today, given the Supreme Court ruling. I think there are a lot of people on the Republican side who say, well, we don't know about reviving TikTok so quickly if it in fact constitutes now not only a threat in terms of Chinese ownership and national security, but also is a really an addictive habit for so many of our kids and a questionable source of information.
Yeah, I would have no problem seeing TikTok go bye-bye. Somebody that has young daughters, I see it. I mean, clearly we can't have Chinese ownership and have basically a through line into our young people's minds. I mean, I don't think there's another side to that argument.
Well, obviously Trump does. He reversed himself on it and now says he thinks that it's, look, you asked me, about getting things done. What about mass deportation? Do you think that there's going to be mass? I don't think Trump's people even think there's going to be mass.
No, I don't think so. I think what they'll do if they're smart is they're going to go after the criminal. Obviously, any criminals, you're out of here. You lead me into kind of my big question. I'm so anticipating Monday's speech because we're going to come out of it feeling one of two ways. We're either going to feel there's a lot of people saying, hey, you know what? Don't be so afraid of Trump. He's not on the defense this time. He's got all the wind at his back. There isn't this kind of opposition out there. And this other side of him is going to come out. And that's obviously what I'm hoping for, what somebody like you would be hoping for also. And then there are those that are obviously frightened that some of the more dictatorial nature of the things that he's talked about will surface. I'm curious which Trump do you think is going to show up?
Oh, I think we've seen this movie before, Donnie. It's not like it's something new. What did Kamala Harris say? Let's not go back. We can't go back. Well, we have gone back, and he's back in the White House. He did come back. It's a little bit like the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'll be back. Well, he's back. And what do we know about the first term? What do we know about 3? Remember, we've seen 3 presidential campaigns from this man. And what have we seen every time? The campaign, the White House term, chaos, name calling, like schoolyard insults, right? Big promises, what happened to the wall? Did Mexico pay for that wall, Donnie? I must have missed that. He makes huge promises. He talks a good game. I don't know that he actually gets a lot done, but it seems to satisfy his voters. His base hasn't gone away. They came back and put him back in the Oval Office. And
I think the Democratic Party has lost its way. I think they've lurched too far left. I think that hurt them. The wokeness that, although those issues are not everyday issues that really affect people. It was an emotional issue of all the wokeism. That one ad that I think could have even swayed the election about the prison, the sex change and the prison operation, which ironically happened under Trump's watch, and the Democrats were too afraid to say that because they thought they were defensive people. But I think the Democratic Party needs a complete makeover at this point. They've lost their way. Nobody knows what they stand for. The people who do think they know what they stand for think they stand too far left. I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, I think that you have to understand that a lot of what Trump does is appeal to fear and push the fear button in our emotions, in our minds. And, given what I've written about in this book, a lot of it has to do with race, I think. But to my mind, when you think about the prospects for Trump, you got to say, is he going to have anybody to constrain his impulsive behavior? And the answer is, I don't see those people anymore. To the contrary, when you look at Project 2025, what I see is people who say we want to free Trump up, to let Trump be Trump. He doesn't have to respond to these traditional Republicans. But your question to me, the one that grips me, is the one about the Democrats. And you say, you think they've lost their way. I think the Democrats have lost their way because right now they don't have a clear message. And I think Donnie Deutsch should be the guy who could help us all get a message, but
they also don't have a clear leader. The Republican Party was lost until Reagan showed up. The Democratic Party was lost until Clinton showed up, and then Obama showed up, and the Republican Party was lost until Trump showed up. And so I think there's a lack of message, but I think we haven't had the right messenger. And I think that's what's really hurt us on top of everything else.
Well, I think you got two things going on there, message and messenger. Trump has decimated the Republican Party. This is not the Republican Party you and I know.
Of course not.
Not at all. I mean, even in terms of principles, right? I mean, about, the shining city on the hill of Ronald Reagan, forget that, right? He's America first. That's what I hear. Anyway, I think, it's even hard for me to put together the evangelical component of the Trump base and Trump's own personal behavior, the kind of people he's nominated to the cabinet, but they close their eyes. It's all about Trump. There is no one in the Republican Party who is a peer to Trump, who could challenge Trump or even position themselves as a successor to Trump. That's just not in the cards. This is all about Trump. He has dominated national politics since 2016 when he first ran.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the book. Let's get into it because it's such a fascinating premise. Your first book talks about the civil rights movement as it was really around Martin Luther King and around obviously beating segregation, doing it through peace, not doing it through violence. Really appealing to basically getting judges to change things. And the second one is very different. It's not built around a figure. It's more of a reaction. It involves Black Lives Matter. It involves the killing of Trayvon Martin, and the math is different. The mission is the same. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'm listening to you carefully because I think you get message tremendously. I really respect you on this. I think when I think of the first movement, and in terms of we've been talking about message and messenger in terms of current politics. You think of the first movement, and clearly you think of Dr. King as the messenger. In fact, in terms of the historical record, you have people around like Roy Wilkins, A. Philip Randolph. Don't forget the important role played by Lyndon Johnson, Hubert Humphrey. Mm-hmm. These people played a very important role. Why do I say that? Because the message of the first movement, apart from the messenger, was we want legislation that confirms that Black Americans are constitutionally citizens of this republic. Yeah. And so they have civil rights, 64 Civil Rights Act, and they have voting rights, 65 Voting Rights Act. And Dr. King leads a march, and the Great March on Washington, and he speaks about a dream, everybody coming together. Folks go home, 250,000 people. You come forward, and you look at this current movement, and it's really, I think of, let's say after the George Floyd death, Black Lives Matter marches, thousands of marches across the country, millions of people. It's not only across the United States, but across the globe. You could have been, it's unbelievable. You could have been in Tokyo, you could have been in Paris, Buenos Aires, and there were Black Lives Matter marches, and it's on the internet. So previously, you had Dr. King and, Roy Wilkins in New York issuing statements saying this is the agenda. We're trying to get this bill through Congress. We're trying to get President Kennedy to agree, President Johnson to agree. Now, the message seems diffuse. Yes, they're concerned about police brutality, but they're also not issuing statements. There's no way to say, hey, we are one group with one message. It may be that you have a Black Lives Matter chapter in Cleveland that's got one thing going on, another one in Toronto, another one, down in Miami. You say, well, wait a second, where's the consistency? And I got to say, there's bad news here, Donnie. A lot of it is lack of transparency, lack of accountability. They raised like $90 million after George Floyd. Where'd the money go? It turns out a lot of money went into people's pockets, so there's a lot of negativity there, but it's a different movement. And it's not just defined in that way. Right now, you and I have been talking about politics. You think about Trump making a big deal out of ending DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, not only in corporate America, but in the government. And, for him, this is what those radical, crazy leftist Antifa people are up to. They're trying to take away equality for white people. White people can't succeed because if they are the best in the class, they don't get into the best college because they have to give preferences to these minorities, that kind of thing. Hiring, oh, terrible. These big companies now are making DEI efforts. You think about things even like curriculum. Why do we have to tell stories about race? Because it could make people feel bad, Donnie. And we don't want to upset people, especially a little kid. Why does he have to hear about slavery and lynching it? I'm telling you, there are so many discussions, so many ramifications that come from the discussion of what this moment, in terms of the second civil rights movement, is having on the country. What about mass incarceration? The relationship between police and Black people. It's all over, but I think people are reluctant to see it as a civil rights movement because they think back to the first movement, Dr. King, very orderly, very clear agenda. Now there's a more diffuse agenda. There is no clear leadership. And I think a lot of people are slow to come to it thinking, I'm not comfortable talking about this.
Yeah, I want to talk about DEI a little bit because I'm a very progressive guy.
Right.
I did see in corporations what I would call an overreaction to DEI, whereas it started to take over so much of the central nervous system of companies, as opposed to saying, look, we need to be doing equality hires and we need to be doing all the right things and be inclusive and whatnot. And I do think, and this is why DEI sometimes now has a negative connotation to it, is that there was an extreme reaction to it, and that it went a little too. I can't tell you how many CEOs tell me the amount of time I spend now, not on selling my product, but on DEI. And there's got to be the pendulum's got to find the right measure from a moral point of view, and the right measure from a pure meritocracy point of view at the same time also.
Yeah, well, I don't know how anybody could disagree with what you just said. I would say that in a country that is such a demographic mix these days, one of the things I mentioned in the book is it used to be in that first movement, gosh, it was like a 90% white country, and
2045, it's going to be a white minority country.
And now
you talk about that.
Yeah, the largest minority in the country is the Latino population. The fastest growing is the Asian population. And you think that's a different conversation. That's a different political dynamic in this second movement than there was in the first. The marches after George Floyd's death, they were massive, as I said, thousands of marches, millions of people, but mostly white people. And I think that, you think about people who say, what, okay, I get it. That, you shouldn't put your knee on a guy's neck and kill him. And there were lots of people who said, in terms of justice, equality, the kind of country that we want to be as America, there's going to have to be some change. By the way, the second largest group in all those marches, Hispanics, Blacks were the third, but it just speaks to how there's a huge demographic shift, and it impacts how we think about civil rights and change in the country today. So
one of the great wrenches in that is how, not wrenches, but ironies or twists or caveats, is how Trump did, how well he did with the Latino vote.
And young black men.
And young black men. So break that down for me.
Well, let me just make a point to something else that you were saying that I think is so important. Okay, you're talking about corporate bosses saying, I spend so much time on this stuff as opposed to trying to make money. And I just think that the demographic shifts also means a market shift. And I think, Donnie, given what I know about you from afar, I think you are tapped into markets and how markets impact profits. And so the United States is a different market when you have a different kind of population as your clientele. And so the corporate bosses have to respond in a way that they didn't before. I mean, they don't, the size of the black middle class, the size of the educated black middle class, the presence of more of a global economic market and the impact it has, the need for, by the way, why there won't be so much mass deportation, the need for those workers, those immigrants as workers is very real. So this impacts the conversation about corporate America. It's not just, I could see you with a corporate boss, likely a white male. So it's two white guys and they're saying, I have to spend so much time on this. But in fact, if it's about making money, you have to respond to the changing realities of your client base. Now I forgot what you were following up and asking me another question, Donnie.
I was asking you about explaining young black men and the Hispanic vote really moving very, very pronounced to Trump, not pronounced by comparison to past voting blocks.
Yeah, so it's about the numbers that I see. I go with let's go with the AP numbers. About a quarter of young black men voted for Donald Trump. Half of the young
that number is usually around 11% or something like that. I think it was a dramatic shift.
Exactly, and about half of the young Latino men. And first of all, I think that was a surprise. It's still the case that 80+% of Black Americans voted for Harris, voted for the Democratic Party. But those numbers are really telling to me. And here's what it tells me. It tells me that for a lot of young black men, when they look at their lives, they say, well, the schools in my neighborhood still terrible. I go outside and I'm still having trouble, getting respect that I need to move up, to get a good job, to pay, to start a family. I'm not feeling good about the way things are going because I look at inflation. And if you are working class, and certainly if you're poor, inflation has a higher impact on your life than it does for Donnie Deutsch. So they're saying, people say to me that Trump is a bad guy and Trump is this and that, but I'm looking for something different. The status quo is not doing it for me. It's not meeting my needs. And I think that's what you saw. You have a large cohort of the Latino and Black youth in this country that are working class people. And they're out there and they're saying it's a struggle. And why is no one responding to me? This is part of the way,
you're using this. This is the same math that white voters, he lost white voters also. It was like, this is about what's better for me. What's going to help me with my prices? What's going to kind of shut down the borders and protect my family? And how is my life going to be better? And the Democrats didn't have a clear answer for that.
I agree. And again, I'm talking to the message maven, and maybe you could help, but I don't know that Donald Trump had a clear message except, immigrants are bad and they're eating your pets in Ohio, which is nonsense. And people say it's nonsense. And others, but hey, I tell you what, I walk down the street, I see these homeless people, or I see that the city has to put these Latino immigrants in a hotel and it feels unsafe. It's just like, Donnie, if you and I were talking about the black kid walking down the street with the hoodie and the pants falling off his butt, and you say, Juan and Donnie went out to dinner and they're coming home and they see this kid, and they're both a black man and a white man feeling somewhat threatened by the approach of this kid. Now, is it right to kill that kid? Trayvon Martin? No. But it is a signal that we need to talk about what's going on with that kid, and a signal that we need to deal with it, because Juan and Donnie should not feel fearful and angry about being fearful and told you can't express the fear because it's politically incorrect. That's nonsense. Let's deal with this issue. Let's talk about it. And I think what it does when this happens, this dynamic, is it opens the door to people who want to undermine conversations about racial progress and racial unity in the country. They say, let's just not talk about race, but let's talk about crime and these kids and how crazy they are and how they make us feel unsafe. And they're breaking into our cars, these carjacking. And you think, wait, okay, let's have that conversation. Everybody wants to be safe, but you're also talking about race and you're saying there's some racial element to it, and that politicians, I think, exploit it and build resentment and grievance culture. You talk about identity politics. I don't think there's any bigger identity politics at play than Trump and white identity politics in America today, but it's never cast in that light. It's always identity politics in terms of the Black Lives Matter or the Latino immigrants or people who will say, we have to be nice to these people around the globe instead of taking care of America first. Nobody ever said,
So I want to go back to Black Lives Matter. And as the branding guy, it was not a successful branding exercise. It was when I say the words the civil rights movement, that's like one of the great branding exercises of all time.
Absolutely.
And Black Lives Matter somehow did not connect across. I don't think it had a more. There was also a, and once again, forget the intention and forget where it comes and the goodness behind it. It had, as a branding guy, there was a division to it at the same time. What was built into it. And do you hear anything that I'm saying? Does that make any sense to you in terms of, you know, I don't subscribe to the idiots who say, why don't you say all lives matter? That has nothing, that's like stupidity. That's like, that's not what that's about. It's like saying no.
That's a response to Black Lives Matter. That's like you're saying, oh, I hear what you're saying with Black Lives Matter, and I'm going to, you know, counter you by saying all lives matter. But you weren't saying all lives matter before there was Black Lives Matter. So you know what this is really about. But I'm interested in what you're in this question because it's coming from you and you're saying you think it was bad branding. Let me just tell you though. That
I think it was branding that was strong, but I don't know if it stands the test of time the way the civil rights movement as a set of words, if you will. I guess that's the kind of dichotomy I'm drawing here.
Yeah, I know. I hear you loud and clear. And I would just advise you to remember how unpopular Dr. King was in the 1960s. And people forget. And civil rights movement and all that. But if you come forward after things like Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter raises all this money. I mentioned it earlier, like $90 million. It just floods in. And where does it come from? Obviously, it's coming from largely the white community. And we talked about the corporations. The corporations responded in a positive way. And some people, as you would say, felt maybe they over-responded. And in terms of the marchers, as I said to you, most of the marchers were white people. And so it wasn't that black, and I still see, I mean, I live in Washington, but I go to New York often. I still see windows that have Black Lives Matter stickers in them, and I see them in white neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, Latino neighborhoods. So it's not, to me, I don't know that people think it was a bad slogan, but I think that what it did was it opened the door to things very quickly becoming racially divisive. And what do I mean by that? That people could say, well, what about all lives matter? What about blue lives matter? The cops, we need to respect the cops. And are you saying only Black lives matter? So is this Black lives against cop lives? And then you say, well, wait a second, I like cops. What's I wasn't saying.
Yeah, I guess you're hitting the nerve that I'm trying to get to. It was more like Black Lives Matter got associated with defund the police and things like that.
Yeah.
And that's what hurt it.
Right. You know, and not only in your opinion, but I mean, you start talking to people like the late John Lewis, start talking to Jim Clyburn, who's kind of the dean of black politics in Washington.
Sure.
And they say the same thing Donnie Deutsch just told you. It was a killer. They think it was something that was totally devastating to the larger cause of saying, you know what, we have common humanity and we're trying to achieve racial justice in America. Suddenly, that message got lost, drowned out by this deep on the police. People are like, that's nuts. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Why would I be identifying?
That's where we started.
That? So, but I don't know. I don't know that Black Lives Matter. In fact, I would argue that MAGA is a hell of a title and a hell of a movement. Obviously, just put in a new president. But I think Black Lives Matter and MAGA stand really as strong points of opposition. And both have the ability to be undercut, to be weakened. People might say, you know, I think even when I see a MAGA hat, I don't like it. I get a funny feeling. Yeah. And people might say, oh, Black Lives Matter, I get a funny feeling.
Yeah.
There's no denying those are the two big movements of this era of American history.
It would be nice if we got to a place that those movements somehow moved in the same direction. I'm a little, you know, I'm an optimist. We're certainly very far from there now. So talk to me about give me the third book that's not the third book in this series that's not out yet. What's that going to look like?
I don't know, Donnie. I hadn't thought about it, but you know, I do think I wrote a piece the other day it's based on this second book, New Prize for These Eyes, talking about this rise of the second movement. So then I wrote a piece for the Washington Post, and I said, there's going to be a third movement. And this really picks up on so much of what you have been talking about in the questions I hear from you today, which is, well, how do you really build political coalitions that can win? How do you build messaging that will appeal to people across racial lines as opposed to divide people? How do you say for a third movement in a demographically hodgepodge country like we are, how do you say, hey, 80% of white people may have voted, 80% of Trump's vote was white. How do you say to that 80% group, you know what? You have an interest in racial unity and racial progress. It's in your interest, in your family's interest, in your town's interest, in your school's interest, that we really fix this racial division and not open ourselves to allowing the Russians and the Chinese to exploit racial division and weaken America. And that you, in terms of your jobs, in terms of your businesses, in terms of our national defense, that we understand we can be one people, e pluribus unum. That is the American dream. And so you got to find a way to build these coalitions. One of the big things, I think, one of the big criticisms in my book of Black Lives Matter is they were diverse. And when I say not diverse, they're diffuse. Their lack of leadership. They also included this aspect. They were totally disrespectful of Obama, of elected Black politicians, but elected politicians of any kind. They treated politics as corrupt, and they were totally unwilling to engage in compromise or talk through issues and come to some new point of view. They didn't build alliances with the Latino community, the Asian community, female community, people concerned about abortion rights. They didn't do it.
I guess that's what I was meant what the branding problem was. You're hitting it. You're being articulate in a way that I was not. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the third movement then is, can you get people like Donny Deutsch to say, hey, wait, I'm more comfortable now with a third movement that's very clearly to me about my self-interest as a white man in America who wants to do what's right, but I don't want some nonsense about defund the police or we don't like, you can't say, and I think I'm afraid of that Black kid walking down the street because someone will call you a racist. No, we got to get rid of that stupidity and say we want to have conversations because we want to get something done.
Juan Williams, you are a gentleman and a scholar. The new book, which will be a bestseller, it's just out this week. New Prize for These Eyes, The Rise of America's Second Civil Rights Movement. Appreciate you. I've been a big fan of your work over the years. Thank you, my friend.
So, Donny, I am so excited that you took the time to talk to me. Thank you. And obviously, I follow Donny Deutsch, so thanks.
Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.